race Red Barber. Well, Earl said, Mr. Ricky, that's fine, but I'll
Gabe is eating some cereal and watching Ernie Harwell on TV. I told him to remember what he's seeing and hearing because it's one of the greatest Tigers ever, one of the greatest people. That's right, one of the greatest people ever in the Detroit Tiger organization. And you should try to remember it, because you'll probably never see another one like Ernie. Right. I wish you could remember him, but I don't know that you will.
One that the fans have always identified with. When talking about a player who was called out on strikes looking, you would say he stood there like the house on the side of the road. Where did that come from?
That came from a poem by Sam Walter Foss. It was written back in the 1880s, and when I was a tongue-tied kid back in Georgia, I had to make speeches and debate every month in the public schools, so I learned that declamation. And I used to recite that poem, and I guess in my subconscious one time when I was broadcasting, probably in the minor leagues, that came to mind, and I said it, and it sort of caught on.
Tongue-tied?
Yes, I was. I was tongue-tied up until about the age of 7 or 8, and I had a great elocution or expression teacher, as we called them. You'd call them a speech therapist now. And she helped me, and through the grace of God, I overcame that handicap.
Yeah, you've seen so many classic games and so many classic moments. Of course, you were there in 1951 when the Giants and Dodgers had their playoff game. I think we all look back on that, and most of us think about Russ Hodges and his classic, the Giants win the pennant, call. But you were also there, but you were on the TV side. How did you call that moment?
Well, I said it's gone, and then I let the camera take over, and then I got home after the ball game, and my wife Lulu looked at me and she said, Ernie, you've had that stunned look on your face only twice, when we were married and when the kids were born. But Russ did a great job on that on the radio, I think, and that's one of the most famous broadcasts of all time. Russ saying the Giants win the pennant, the Giants win the pennant.
And you talk about how many great players you've seen. As you go back, and because you've seen so much, Ernie, let me bounce a couple of things off you. I think it's generally accepted, perhaps, that Willie Mays was the greatest defensive outfielder of all time. Do you see it that way, or maybe was it Al Kaline?
No, I think Willie was probably a little bit better, and Willie had more all-around ability than Al. Al's a great friend of mine and a terrific right fielder, but I think all in all, you'd have to put Willie on the top of the heap.
What about pitching? Sandy Koufax or Warren Spahn?
Well, I'd take Warren Spahn because he won more games than any other left-hander. For the short term, I might take Mr. Koufax, but he had that arthritic elbow that shortened his career. He could certainly dominate a game more than any single left-hander, I think.
You know, have you ever seen anything like that? Sandy Koufax coming on the scene, and as you point out, of course, it was a shortened career, but for the time that he was there, as dominant as he was, the flair that he had, the charisma that he had, have you ever seen anything quite like that in the game?
No, I don't think so. We had a very charismatic young man here, Mark the Bird Fidrich, but he had only 1 year, and he certainly didn't have the ability that Sandy had. And Bob Gibson was a great and dominating pitcher, too, but I think maybe Koufax on the short term was the tops.
Hey, Ernie, what about Mark Fidrich? What a different guy he was, and I mean that in a positive sense. He came so quickly, and he exploded.
Gabe, you never saw Mark the Bird Fidrich. Never even heard of him until now. Look at him.
Well, he was, and all he wanted to do was to talk to the ball and throw it past the hitters.
Look at him.
It was a breath of fresh air when
he was the greatest.
Was struggle at that time.
For 1 year, he was the greatest.
And I think he's the guy that really brought the curtain call into baseball in a strong fashion, because whenever he pitched the game and won it, the Tiger fans didn't want to go home. They wanted the Bird to come out and give them away.
You know, what I thought was so great about the Bird, Ernie, was it was not contrived. It wasn't some manufactured wackiness. That's really the way he was. It was quite genuine.
He certainly was. It wasn't a marketing ploy like you mentioned, and I think that's what made it good. And another thing about the Bird was he was a sweet guy whether he won or lost, and he met the triumph and disaster, as Kipling says, very much the same way.
It is indeed a pleasure to have you on the program, Tigers.
Well, no, I don't think so. He was really intimidating that afternoon in St. Louis. He set the World Series strikeout record, and certainly he was a tough pitcher. Looked like he might win 3 games, but the Tigers finally caught up with him in the 7th and final game when Mickey Lolich outdueled him, and Northup hit a triple to send in 2 runs and send the Tigers to the World's title.
Ernie, who is the best pure hitter you've ever seen?
Ted Williams, I think. Ted was a great student of the game. He would talk to anybody who would talk about hitting. He was very thorough, very enthusiastic about his craft, and anything that there was about hitting, Ted Williams tried to learn it and put it into practice.
You know, it's really a great story, I think. Last year, when Seattle came to town, Ichiro Suzuki said that he wanted to meet you, and he asked for an introduction. I would imagine, even though you know everybody and anybody in the sport, that had to be something of a thrill for you as well.
Oh, it was. I was very flattered by Ichiro asking to meet me, and I certainly enjoyed talking to him. We had a nice little conversation through an interpreter, and I was very much impressed by his personality, his demeanor, and not to mention his great playing ability, because he came in that first year and led the league in hitting, stolen bases, and was the most valuable player, the Rookie of the Year. You can't do much better than that.
Of course, when Tigers owner Mike Ilitch came in, Ernie, he told you that you could stay as long as you want, which was great. It was very, very nice, especially since previous owner Tom Monahan had the audacity to regroup you back in 1992. That was actually a very tough time, a very difficult thing to go through, wasn't it?
Well, it certainly was, but I recognize that, Jim, as a business decision. When you work for somebody, he's got a right to fire you. I never felt bitter about it, and I was just very fortunate that Mike Ilitch came in and had the confidence and trust in me to give me the job, and as you said, to tell me that I could stay on as long as I wanted to.
I mean, at that time, when you go through something like that, you weren't thinking about a possible return to the Atlanta Crackers, were you?
Oh, no. No, I didn't know what I was going to do. I did some CBS radio game of the week, and I did some games for the California Angels. I enjoyed that stint, too, but I was happy to get back with the Tigers.
You know, you still love to do the job, you still love to travel, you still love to work, even at age 84. Ernie, does that have anything to do with the fact that your father was confined to a wheelchair when he was in the prime of his life and in the prime of his career?
Well, I think so. My dad had multiple sclerosis. He never worked after he was about 30 years old, but he had a great positive attitude about things. He loved baseball. He inculcated that love of baseball into me, and I appreciated the way he looked at life, because he was a great conversationalist. He loved to be around people, and he always had a bright outlook.
It seems like it's more than just the approach to the job, Ernie. I mean, that really is the way you are. Everybody who comes in contact with you says the exact same thing. How generous you are, how you have time for everybody. I guess when you consider what your father went through and the attitude he adopted, dealing with that, well, frankly, it's a big impact on his son.
Well, I think I'm very lucky to have a dad like that. I'm very lucky and blessed to have a job, Jim, that I really enjoy. I don't look on it as work. I've enjoyed every minute coming to the ballpark. I love the game. I've been in it forever. And the people of Michigan and all over the country have been great to me.
You know, Tiger fans have certainly grown up with you, much as Dodger fans grew up with Vin Scully. And Jack Buck had a number of fans in the St. Louis area that grew up with him, even Harry Carey in Chicago and St. Louis. I think what's sad, Ernie, when you leave and Vin Scully's done broadcasting as well, we're never going to have that base of fans that identifies with or grows up with a particular announcer. It's just not that way anyway because of cable and the proliferation of all the other media. It's kind of sad that way.
Well, that's a good point. I think it's a lot harder for a young man. Now, we've got some fine announcers here, but there's so many games now available to the viewing or the listening public that it's very hard for one guy to dominate his area or to make a name for himself in a big hurry. I think he has to stay around a while, and that's where I've been lucky, and Vinny and the other guys, they stuck around. People got used to them, and really they became part of the family and the conduit between the ball club and the public.
You know, the other day I ran into a friend of yours, Ernie, here in the studios here in Los Angeles, and you and I have talked about some of the great players. What about the great managers? Have you ever seen a more colorful manager,
Sparky,
a better manager than Sparky Anderson?
No, I don't think so. Sparky had a special touch.
Look at Gabe. Sparky.
Car salesman.
Get out of here.
I think better than anybody I've ever run into. He knew how to handle the malcontents.
Barbaro Garbe.
Stars.
Chet Lemon.
He knew how to handle the youngsters and the rookies, and he melded them competitive teams, not to mention the fact that he was a good strategist from the dugout.
You know, Tiger Stadium, of course, is no longer with us. Probably it was time for a new stadium because that's the direction that we're going in. When you look at the revenue streams and everything else, I mean, everything has its time. Was it sad to see the old ballpark go, though?
It was a bittersweet time when we gave up on Tiger Stadium. But moving into Comerica Park here in Detroit has softened the blow because we've got a great ballpark here. And I like the fact that the people that built Comerica Park took into consideration that the pitchers deserved a little bit of a break. All the rule makers and ballpark builders over the last several years have favored the hitters. And I think the pendulum has got to swing back, Jim, a little bit toward the pitching and defense.
So, Ernie, what will you do when the time comes when you finally do not need to get up and go to the ballpark? What will you do?
Well, I still write a column in the Free Press. I'll do some speaking. I'll do some of my commercial work. But most of all, I'll visit the ballpark from time to time and renew my friendship with the guys that have been around and just enjoy the game still.
Well, you certainly have earned that right. I'm glad you took the time to put your thoughts and experiences to paper along with Tom Keegan. Ernie, it was a distinct pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much and good luck to you.
Thank you, Jim.
Ernie Harwell, he is a living legend.